Welcome everyone to this joint webinar hosted by Dragos and Rockwell Automation. My name is Umair Masood. I spent 13 years at Rockwell Automation in the OT cybersecurity space, doing various roles, and have recently joined Dragos as the Director of Product for OT Watch and Neighborhood Keeper. And it is my pleasure to be moderating this discussion today between, I think it's safe to say, two of the most well-respected individuals in OT cybersecurity, and arguably the two people, when put together, that have the broadest reach and exposure in this space. Between the peers that you both get to work with, be it CISOs in the top industrial companies of the world, or the boardrooms that you brief across critical infrastructure organizations internationally. You both really have a unique vantage point to provide some really good insight into how we tackle challenges in this space and really what type of leadership is needed to succeed. So really that's the reason I'm excited about today's discussion. Now, not to delay us, but I do want to introduce you two quickly. I think everyone has probably read your bios either today or in the previous many talks that you guys have given. Rob Lee, co-founder, CEO of Dragos, and Don Cappelli, VP and CISO at Rockwell Automation. But since I've known both of you for quite some time, and since recently that I've joined Dragos, I can now say that I've had the pleasure of working for both of you as well. So rather than doing the customary introduction, I just wanted to provide the audience with some insight into what it's like to really work for both of you. So Rob, let's start with you. 3 words that come to mind are passionate, honest, and candid. What you see is what you get. There's no other type of Rob that you get in closed doors. There's only one type of Rob. And honestly, working for someone that kind of exudes that transparency and really encourages it within their company culture, I think is extremely refreshing. But I think it's also important in keeping the team focused and excited about the mission at hand. Don, you quite literally wrote the book on insider threats. Other names I've heard people bestow upon you are Khaleesi of cybersecurity.
I love that. Till the last episode.
But I think what people may not know is I think your real superpower is really building the most effective cybersecurity teams in the industry. You really have a knack for getting the right mix of people together, focused on that singular mission. And that's hard. And I think, getting them together to be focused on, defending the connected enterprise ecosystem, and motivated and excited about that, and just so mission oriented on it, I think is a testament to your leadership. So enough with introductions. I want to let you guys loose here. I know that if I let you two go, you'll probably keep us entertained on answering a single question for the entirety of the webinar, but I'll attempt to break up the conversation into 4 or so questions focused on the topic of OT cybersecurity strategies for executives. I will let the audience go ahead and submit questions. If we do have time at the end, we will go ahead and take some questions. But if we aren't able to get to them, both Don and Rob have agreed to look to get a blog post out to answer any of the remaining questions. So first question, it's I think a really simple one, but I think how we talk about this can really set the tone for a company's journey to deal with these challenges. So as cybersecurity professionals and executives look to understand this space, what I want to really start with, Rob, is what are the risks that we have to deal with in OT?
Yeah, great. So, I mean, look, I think it's a great place to start it, and we definitely have to get aligned. And that's probably one of the big barriers I see for most companies is when there's not alignment from the board on down on what the risks are that we're trying to solve. A lot of times, cybersecurity teams, whether on the IT or OT side, are handling risks they see and trying to handle those risks with the resources they have, but that's not necessarily been elevated up. And so they're not resourced correctly. And because the executive team feels like, hey, we're aligned on X risks, I've given you X resources, and they feel comfortable with that. But when there's new risk, they definitely need to be able to evaluate that. So when I look at the risk in OT, first thing I think about is impact, right? And I know impact isn't risk, but I think a lot about the outcomes. And the outcomes in our line of work, number one is safety. I don't care what industry you work in. We all put a large focus on safety before we talk about data protection and so forth. Outside of that, though, we also have to appreciate that all the revenue in the business is generated out of the OT side of the house, which means that not only is there revenue impact to that company and shareholders, but also usually the employees and people that work there and depend on that are part of that supply chain. And of course, I would just generally say that people generally try to put into like availability, confidentiality, things like that. I just like to figure out what the mission is at that site and then figure out what the risk might be to there. But as a general statement, obviously there's insiders and external and all sorts of things to deal with. Where I usually spend a lot of my time focusing is on the external piece, which is kind of the cyber threat piece of it. And everything that we're experiencing now, from human operated ransomware taking down plants way more than is public, to state adversaries that are doing everything from military preparation type actions, things we're seeing right now in Ukraine and Russia, to intellectual property theft. You know, a lot of these companies have a ton of intellectual property, and it's not maintained in an email server. It's in your manufacturing lines. It's in your production environments. I had a discussion recently with the CEO of a large company that said, hey, this new product we're launching is $1 billion product line for us. If it were to be stolen, intellectual property theft, forget the disruption, all the availability, all this stuff, but if it were to be stolen, it would cost this company $1 billion. And so that's an easy way for them to start thinking about the risk then and how they actually go and resource that. So anyways, I would say that we as an industry, and I'll end with this and kick it over to Don, I would say that we as an industry, when we talk about risks, are largely operating on what we know about. And what we know about is from people that are getting into those environments, monitoring their networks, doing some response, doing assessments, so forth, getting data to then manifest into insights. And some industries are getting more data than others. So if you're in an industry, they're like, oh, we don't see a lot of risks. The problem is you're probably not looking. And so that's why you're not seeing. Everywhere that we have experience in going and looking, these risks and these threats manifest. And that's where I often joke that sometimes we have like the equivalency of Schrodinger's ICS. You know, you can't say that if you've never been in it, you've never looked in it, you've never looked in the box, you can't tell me if the cat's alive or dead. And so we just need to be very thoughtful about going and chasing that down. But I would say the key takeaway is make sure you get alignment board on down on what those risks are to get resources. And then get back to you or Don.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, just even talking about impact, Rob, I've had conversations with multiple CISOs from our customers that have been hit with ransomware. And it's heartbreaking to be in those conversations with them. You know, that they're not prepared. IT, OT, they don't work together. And I was working with one CISO who had been hit with ransomware, said, look, what can we do to help? What are you guys doing to recover? And he was totally cut out of the whole recovery process. OT was handling that on their own. They weren't even working with the CISO. And I think that that's something that we have to get around. The CISOs out there, the executives out there, we have to take a holistic approach to this. Ransomware, you know, from my perspective, that's what we're seeing is it's hitting our customers. It's targeting OT environments. Because they're harder to recover and they're more likely to pay the ransom, although I've read that they're less likely to pay the ransom. So I'm seeing differing statistics on that. But I just think we have to realize this threat is real. When it hits, it is much more difficult to deal with in OT than IT.
All right. So thank you for your insight there. I think, you know, when we look at next steps, we really start to get into this discussion of, you know, how do you start to educate executive leadership on these OT, ICS, cyber risks, and then how do you start to help them understand and really ask for kind of investments in this space? And I think, you know, I want to start with you, Dawn, on that one.
Yeah, so I actually was really lucky because for us at Rockwell, we have one senior vice president who's in charge of all of our manufacturing. So I had to get one person to buy in, as well as our CIO and our CEO, of course, and the board. But really, that one person I had to get on board was that one SVP, where a lot of companies, all of their plants have different, each plant manager has autonomy about what they do in their plants. So they have to get all of those different plant managers on board, and that's not a good strategy. So I like going for the CEO level. Last year, we did a tabletop exercise for our CEO and his staff, his senior vice presidents, and we just did a general ransomware tabletop. And so we started with small ransomware attack, takes out some of the servers, not a big impact. Scenario 2 takes out all of IT, we keep it out of OT. And then the third scenario was it gets into OT and the plants are down. That was the easiest actual conversation to have, because one thing about leaders in companies that have OT environments, they know exactly how much money each plant makes each day. And they know if a plant is going to be down for X number of days or weeks or months, that's going to cost us this much money. So it's very easy to talk to them in those terms and get them to buy into an OT security strategy. The other thing is, I'm a big believer in empirical data. I used to work at Carnegie Mellon, so it's in my DNA. And there's a lot of good empirical data, unfortunately, about the impacts of ransomware attacks in OT. You can go out to any company that's been hit with a ransomware attack, look for their SEC filing. You can see exactly how long each of their plants was down and how much that cost the company. So we used real data and took real numbers to our executives and got full buy-in. So much though, so that we had the tabletop on Monday. This was like December 13th in 2020. Friday night, I got a call from the SVP of our manufacturing. And he said, Dawn, you know, I've been thinking about that tabletop, and I think we need to think broader. We need to think about our distribution centers. What if one of them gets taken down? Some of them are third parties, and we need to make sure they don't get taken down, because if they do, then we'll be producing product but have no one to distribute it. So to me, boy, you can't get more successful than that, than the Friday before Christmas, having your SVP at night call about his ideas about the whole cyber strategy.
Yeah, I got to participate in that process since I was at Rockwell then. And that was an amazing experience. And I do want to add, I think, you know, the side benefit to that in my mind was that as practitioners, as those that are responsible to help keep our executives informed, it really kind of forced us to make sure we did our homework. Right? We needed to validate those impact numbers. We needed to make sure that the information we were gathering and then putting in front of them for the tabletop, you know, was accurate. And I think a lot of times, you know, we kind of take for granted what it really means to, you know, kind of understand the level of impact or what downtime costs really mean. But I think when we kind of did that exercise, it kind of like made sure that we had all of our ducks in a row before we went in front of that team, the executive team, and went, you know, ran them through that tabletop.
Yeah, I hate to jump in because it's your turn, Rob. But
there's no turns, and I knew what I signed up for, Don.
The interesting thing is that made us look at our compensating controls, because it's easy to look in a vacuum and say, oh my God, if we get hit with ransomware, this is going to be the impact, and go for the drama. But, you know, we had to be realistic. We had to say, well, we do have these controls in place. So the impact to us we're projecting it would be this. But I think that's really important too, because a lot of times as CISOs, we get accused of, you know, Chicken Little, the sky is falling. Thank you, Log4j, another time when we're probably being accused of that. But, you know, I think those compensating controls are an important thing to factor in.
Yeah, thanks, Don. So, Rob, I think you have a slightly different perspective as you go in to educate not just kind of executive leadership, but even board of directors, right? I think I'd love to hear from you on how you approach kind of that type of education.
Yeah, and I completely agree with what Don said, anyways. And I think, as you said, I'm candid, anyways. So for any of the audience, if I didn't agree, I'd let you know. But I'm happily aligned. But one of the things that I think is interesting is the tabletop exercises, pound for pound, best resources you can spend, because it forces the alignment. Okay. And it talks about who has the lanes and who do you contact or so forth. So I do like at the board level bringing up tabletop exercises as well. I just think it's start with the executive team first, get your alignment in the house before you then go talk to the board about it. But at the board level, there's a couple of things that work really well. Is one, just to make sure they're aware of their current state. And this is the place that gets really tough when we go in for like incident response cases. So even though we're a technology company, we also have an IR team. And when we go into these incident response cases, it's really common for it to be an almost emotional discussion with the CEO or the board, where it was, hey, what do you mean they got in over here? I thought we rolled out two-factor authentication already, or that kind of control. Or what do you mean it spread across 80 plants? We already rolled out the segmentation project that we were told about. And so they'll usually have kind of these bucket items they remember resourcing, or they remember approving. And every time, like every single time, what they think the business looks like is not what the business looks like. It was stuff like, hey, you thought you rolled out that segmentation project, but it actually got cut from the budget in the end. And so you did a 4-site rollout, not the 80 sites. And that's why you had that impact. Or, hey, you were going to go to multi-factor authentication, but some of the business units pushed back. So you guys delayed that 3 quarters. And that's why you've got the ransomware case you've got right now. So I don't mind any business making any choices they want, but I want them to know what choices they're making and to be accurate. And in most of the incident response cases on OT, the business does not have a good awareness of where they are in their current OT security posture. One of the big reasons for that is we have to force the discussion of IT versus OT. Now, in all the discussions of working together, it shouldn't be versus, it should be collaboration. We should be working together, as Don had mentioned. But I've been in a number of board meetings. I did one recently. It was one of the largest companies on the planet. I did the board meeting, and the global CISO was there presenting Nist Cybersecurity framework and all the mappings and things they were doing across the enterprise. And the CEO is the one that had called me in, and he kind of like poked over at me and like, see, we're doing a really good job. And I said, no questions asked. Your team is phenomenal and they're doing great work. But is that IT or OT? He's like, wait, what? What are you talking about? It's the enterprise. I'm like, no, are they saying enterprise or are they saying enterprise IT? And so we just asked the global CSO, and he was like, oh yeah, no, enterprise IT. And you could just see the CEO like, oh my gosh, sit back in the chair, eyes, widen up, being like, wait, are you saying that doesn't include our plants? And he's like, yeah, no, enterprise IT. And like, all the metrics and insights and everything we've been getting is only about like our website, and obviously it's IT is more than that. But there's no CEO, CFO, COO, VP of operations. There's none of them that are confused about where they generate revenue in that company. And it's not IT. And so they're totally fine for let's do both. They're both important. But the idea that we've been underserving the side of the house where the revenue is generated is a lights on, eyes open, holy crap, I didn't realize that moment. And we didn't do wrong to get where we are. The industry's changed, various levels of connectivity that we didn't used to have that we have now. Like it's okay that we are where we are. But the very first thing at the board level is to understand that when we used to say, go reduce cyber risk across the business, that manifested in mostly reducing cyber IT risk. And now there's kind of a course correction to take place. And the board needs to understand, because they're going to have to resource it. They don't need to understand all that you're going to do, but they have to understand that you've been doing one mission and now you're adding a whole other mission on arguably more important, and that you're not necessarily currently resourced for that. Then I want to get them into understanding the scenarios, which will make us aligned on the risks. I don't want to get in front of a board and be like, here's what we're doing for VPNs, or here's what we're doing for phishing, or here's what we're doing against it. It's useless. Here's 5,000 scans against the firewall. Pointless. Like, stop throwing up metrics because you think they want to see metrics. Let's get aligned on the risks. And that to me is scenarios. And every board knows how to go through that, just like the engineering and operations side knows how to do it. Actually, security needs to learn this more than the operations side of the house. This goes into, and there's already some questions and comments about it, like LOPA, PHA, HAZOPS. Think about it from like a process hazard analysis perspective, like you would do in the safety industry, where you don't think about how might the valve fail, how might the pump fail. You think about what is the scenario that would lead to an unsafe event. And it's probably 3, 4, 5, 6 different things all happening together. Let's see if we can identify those and brainstorm together and identify that scenario, then put in compensating controls against that. Either re-engineer part of the process to make it safer, or put in safety systems and unique controllers and instrumentation, et cetera. That is a very similar process to the whole kill chain discussion in cybersecurity. Hey, what is the step-by-step? The adversary didn't get in because of Log4j, or they weren't successful because of Log4j. They weren't successful because of that vulnerability. They were successful because they did a series of steps and actions. Maybe it included certain vulnerabilities, but that was just one component of it. So let's stop focusing on the individual thing and think more about the scenario, right? So take that exact same scenario planning process that you might do in safety, elevate it up to a board level and say, what are the 3 to 4 scenarios that we want to be prepared for as a company? And I would argue that you should start with what's ground truth reality in your industry. If you're an electric utility and you haven't had a scenario planning and understanding that you'll be okay in a Ukraine 2015 or Ukraine 2016 style attack, you're way behind. If you're in the manufacturing industry and you haven't looked at intellectual property theft and ransomware scenario across your plants, you're behind. If you're in the oil and gas industry and you haven't looked at compromises of safety systems that happened in the Trisis attack in Saudi Arabia in 2017, you're behind. It's okay not to be ready for everything. But if things have actually manifested and have actually been impactful, those are scenarios that we should be discussing. And then we look for those compensating controls and we go, hey, these 4 or 5 help us against 4 or 5 different scenarios. So we get the best return on investment for doing those. And that's something, again, that a board is more than capable of understanding. Then you get into the tabletop exercises. And the last thing I'll say about that is it drives alignment all the way down to the security operations use cases. Instead of let's look for everything and alert on everything, it's, hey, here's the things that we're worried about as a company. These are the kind of things that can manifest. This is what we should be focused on. Here's where we hunt. Here's how we respond. Here's our playbooks for the response. It just drives a massive alignment across the company.
Thanks, Rob. So I think we had a little bit of this conversation when we were prepping for this, but one of the questions that I thought was, I think there's a spectrum on which people and leaders like to share information with their board. Can you maybe just comment on like how that may differ by industry? Because I think there's this notion of like, oh, well, I share some information with my board, but I'm not going to go do a tabletop with them, or I'm not going to go and, share this amount of information with them.
Yeah, I would just say be careful in the culture. Like, I don't think there's a perfect answer for that, but the worst board meetings I'm in, the worst in front of the CEO and board preparing for discussions with Congress or whoever after a major incident, the worst ones are where they thought they shouldn't be servicing things to the board. And so therefore it's all a surprise. And then there's massive loss of trust. And you got to be careful that it doesn't happen to the CSOs as well. Donna, I've talked about this before. I think the CSOs in our industry do a wonderful job and are up against a rock and a hard place 9 times out of 10. That being said, if you're a CSO of an industrial company, which pretty much all of them are industrial outside of like financial services, if you're a CSO of one of those companies and you're not digging in on the OT side, it's not, forget the risks for a second, you're going to lose trust fast, because every board has, let's say, 8+ board members. Most of them are professional board members, meaning they sit on multiple boards. They're all talking. Everybody is having these conversations. There's not a board I'm aware of that's not got OT security as one of their top 1 or 2 items for the entire company. And if the CISO is never even bringing those topics up, never talking about them, then the board starts to feel that they're more aware of security risks than their CISO, and they start losing massive trust very quickly. So this idea that you can't service things to your board is not a security issue. That's a massive culture challenge that you've got to fix, because it's, the board is there to be fiduciary responsible to the shareholders, internal and external of that company. There's nothing that's off limits for them. They just don't need to be brought into everything. But a lot of security practitioners will think, oh, this is too technical for the board. They're, they almost like want to dumb things down. Dude, like GAAP revenue accounting is harder than half of cybersecurity. Okay. Like your board is sophisticated, smart people. They don't need your technical jargon, but they can get these topics.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you think about the board, there are only so many people on that board that have any knowledge of security or IT. And so, I don't want to bore the board. But what I look at is what is the current threat environment and pick relevant threats. They don't need to hear about everything that's happening out there, but pick the relevant threats for our company. And then show what are we doing about those threats? How are we positioned for those? And so I think that's worked really well for us. For us, like since 2017, when NotPetya hit, we looked at NotPetya and realized several things. First of all, the OT security threat. So boom, had to get that OT security program moving quickly. But the other thing that we saw was our products could be used as the threat vector to get to our customers, because that's what happened with MEDOC, the tax company whose software distribution mechanism was compromised to push out NotPetya. So we told our board that. And so our board's been hearing about supply chain threats and the potential of us to be the supply chain threat for years. So whenever SolarWinds happened, they got it. Like they knew they not only got it, but they didn't have to ask the question, have we thought about this? Have we thought about the potential that we could be used as a supply chain threat? No, because we'd already been talking about it for years. So I think that really gives your board confidence as well. And when we do have incidents, we tell our board and we tell them what we're doing about it, what we're doing so that won't happen again. So they'll never be caught off guard. They'll never say, how could this happen? How, they know what's been going on. But I don't get into the, like you said, Rob, not into the technical details, not into lots of metrics that make it look, that just kind of look like you're just trying to make yourself look good.
Absolutely. And to me, you've got to avoid, we like as security professionals to talk about what we think is interesting. They have the same problem in Intel, right? As an Intel analyst, we find some really cool Intel. We want to write 20 pages about how cool this is. Your consumer cares about the 2 lines up front about what they're supposed to do with it and what they've been asking about. And so we shouldn't entertain people with what we think is cool. We should just get right to the point of what can help them and kind of further that point again at the board, because I'm sure we'll talk about other things than just the board here in a second, but further to the board, to me, it's a binary discussion on risk. I really hate when I see conversations. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying you can't do it. For me personally, I don't like to get into well, we have a 73% chance of this, or we're a 95 out of 50, like I have these FICO scores and whatever. We get like this physics envy. I don't understand it. I don't care for it. What I care for is after we say these are the scenarios, then that should be the CISO and the security team in cooperation with the operations team to understand what would it take to have prevention, detection, and response covered for that, to include recovery and response. But what should we do across the board to have good coverage, knowing that most of the standards out there are preventative focused. We know we need to be able to do detection and response as well. So what does coverage look like? And then that's the package. It's not for the board to come in and be like, well, that's too expensive, or I don't want that. That's the packet. It's binary. It is here's our advice against that. If you want covered on that scenario where we have confidence that when it happens to us, we will be okay, that's a binary package. Now, what happens on the OT side, which is really interesting and a good opportunity for folks, is you might have one big enterprise IT network. You might have 500 OT networks, right? So we get a really good opportunity by the physical nature of our plants and substations and so forth to be able to say, you know what, everything's important, but here's the top 25 to 30% that's important based on either health and safety data, revenue, environmental impact, whatever we want to have, regulatory. Here's our top percentage. Here's our A class sites. Next, maybe it's the 40 or 50, the B class sites. Then it's the C class sites. That's where you can tune the budget to say, hey, with the board, we want to be prepared against these 4 scenarios. These are the 4 ones that we're really concerned about. So all of our A class sites get that package. The B class sites, we just want to be careful about these two scenarios. So they get that package. And the C class sites, maybe we just want an instant response plan for anything that happens, but every wellhead in Kuwait isn't worth the same as, the refinery, and we need to be thoughtful about what we spend. So to me,
That's
that
exactly
is a place the board can be effective.
Yeah, and not only at the board, but just at the security team level and putting together your strategy. The first time that we used the Nist Csf to put together a manufacturing security strategy, we had this great roadmap. In fact, Umair, you were part of that. You didn't even work for me yet. That's when I decided I wanted to recruit you. He was there from the OT expertise perspective from our plants. And so we had this great roadmap. Wow, look at everything we have to do. Oh my gosh, it's huge. And then we said, so what do we do? Do we do everything everywhere, which will take forever? And we'll just make little baby steps over a long period of time? Or do we do everything on a risk basis? And what does a risk basis mean? I mean, it's kind of interesting. Back then, when we made our risk assessment of what are our top tier plants from a risk perspective, we were looking, ransomware didn't really exist back then. I mean, it was before NotPetya and WannaCry. So we really were looking at, okay, we make PLCs, we make drives. Which of our products are more likely to be targeted by an adversary to sabotage those products? Because that's what we were thinking about back then. It was, a foreign adversary could try to sabotage our industrial control system products to sabotage our customers. That's how we risk ranked them back then. But then, as time went on, then ransomware starts hitting. Now you have to start thinking about production and how much money each plant is bringing in. So that risk equation can change over time. And I think that's an important thing for people to keep in mind as well.
Absolutely. And I love the whole, there's the big Gantt chart of here's our 3 to 5 year strategy with 50 different projects. And I don't think that works anywhere, but it could work in enterprise IT. It sure as hell is not working in operations, all these sites. And if I'm sitting there, so for everybody in the call, as we talk about this, if I'm the CEO of the company and you've told me these are the 3 risk scenarios that matter the most, and this is the package required to protect us, and I've authorized that and the board has signed off on it, for you to tell me, oh, we get hit. And I'm like, we were good, right? Oh, no. This 3 years later. Yeah, but we're rolling out it all at the same time. So you're telling me the most important critical site in the company is going to be fully protected at the same time that the least critical site in the company is going to be protected? I would lose my mind. It's and the other opportunity there for the security team is you're going to advise, but you may decide that evolution in the market or whatever else, maybe some of your choices needed to adapt over time. And now if I'm protecting the top 20% of my sites with the full package of whatever it means to do security all at once, I may have lessons learned. I may decide, oh, that product doesn't work the way we thought it did, or that thing doesn't give us what we needed. We need to change it out. And now I haven't invested across the company, and the people and processes can start building up on the full package as it relates to those sites, instead of having to come up a little bit across the whole ocean, every year. So anyways, I think it's a phenomenal route to go in that direction on a risk-based process. And there will be a lot of things that handle into that, but that's also a great thing for the executive team. Don't worry about telling us what to do for security. Why don't you give me a top to bottom list of most critical to least critical sites in this company? That is a workshop that gets some executives talking.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. So you talked about this package of controls. So the next question I really want to pose to you, Rob, first, and I'd love to get Don's perspective as well, is, you've got the buy-in. It seems like everyone's behind you. What is that package start to look like? What are the controls? Where, can you give us a list, top 5?
Yeah.
And so I'll also kind of, you guys are already talking about this prioritization, but I'd love to hear more of that, I think.
Yeah. So I'll give you my view relative to the threats in the industry that we're aware of and tracking. So everything's based on ground truth reality, what's actually happening, and what do we come across, and when do we feel comfortable coming into an incident response, and when do we not? What would we like to see? And so to me, there are just a couple controls that if you did well, you would have a world-class OT program. And that's where I think one of the first elements of the strategy needs to be aligned is we do not need to do everything in IT security in OT security. Because the first time you hear, oh, there's this whole other mission I got to pick up, you immediately start thinking, oh, I got to double all my resources. No, there's things that are just different in OT than in IT, just on value propositions. Like, let's look at vulnerability management just as a quick comment. In IT security, you typically have system security and data security. That's a big hand wave, I know, but you're generally trying to protect the system or protect the data. Hey, I have that Windows system and I want to make sure I patch it. I want to put the EDR on. I want to put application whitelisting. I need to prevent the adversary from escalating privileges and so forth and so on. We think about the system. Or we think about the data. Hey, I want to encrypt it in transit or at rest. I want to make sure I authenticate it well. Like we think about systems and data. That's IT. In OT, it's systems of systems and physics. I don't really care about any one system. Hey, here's this vulnerability that allows me to get root access to the PLC. I don't really care. Like the HMI already has root access to PLC. Like that doesn't introduce any new issues into the plant. Or, hey, well, I need to make sure I encrypt that protocol. I hear this all the time. Like, why? Well, encryption's good. I'm like, it doesn't make any sense internal to your network to be encrypting traffic. It adds latency. You can't monitor it anymore. Makes zero sense. You're going across the internet, feel free. Inside your network doesn't make sense for what we're talking about. So what's the mission? What are the risks? Come up with your controls. My view on the controls is if you did these couple things, you would have a world-class security program. First is have a defensible architecture. And to me, what a defensible architecture means is something that I can then go get visibility and do my security work in, right? You can buy all the products in the world, but you don't have a defended environment until there's a human component. Until you've got people actually going and doing security work as humans, you're not defended, you're just defensible. So, but a defensible environment would mean things like managed switches. I don't want to walk in and find that 400 plants are on one flat network. That's not very defensible, right? So defensible architecture generally implying that you have either firewalls and some level of understanding of your architecture with managed switches, or maybe you're doing software-defined networks instead of firewalls, but some kind of control there relative to the fact that we can get access and insights into the environment to go defend it. So that's number one. Number two for me then goes into like the visibility and monitoring discussion. And in OT, whether you choose Dragos or any other vendor, I do not care for this discussion. All of the vendors out there's plenty of vendors out there that have a solution to go get visibility and monitoring, and we'll all argue about how we're better than the other one. But generally speaking, they're going to provide you help with your inventory, understanding your topology about how things are communicating and connecting, identify vulnerabilities, detect threats, kind of all in one control. But the real benefit there is because their network, they see the system to system level interactions. So like antivirus is not a top 5 control for me because I don't really care about the individual system. Would I like it eventually? Sure, why not? But in the near term, I want to be able to understand when an engineer workstation sends a command to a controller to update logic outside of a maintenance cycle. It's that system of system interaction that I care most for. So number 2 for me is that monitoring solution. Number 3 is then multi-factor authentication, anywhere and everywhere I can put it. And I don't think that's unique to OT. I think that's a classic IT control that you could appropriately use in OT. You got to tailor it a little bit. But absolutely, wherever you can have it, multi-factor authentication. If you can't do multi-factor authentication, then use your defensible architecture for compensating controls like a jump host or something else that you're then going to monitor more closely. Number 4 for me is a key vulnerability management program. I don't want you running down every vulnerability in a digital relay. It doesn't make sense 9 times out of 10. Firmware level vulnerabilities out in a PLC, 9 times out of 10, they don't matter. But did you have the data historian that was connecting up your organization's IT and OT networks? Did you have an HMI that is internet connected, even if it's behind a firewall or connection? Do you have a concentrator that your OEM or integrator is using to get into your environment? Oh, those are easily exploited. They're remotely exploited. They can get access to the environment. Those are important. So it's a key vulnerability management program, not chasing every vulnerability down the plant. And then the last one for me is an ICS specific incident response plan. Do not expect to take your governance strategy response plan, anything from IT and copy and paste into OT. It's not going to work. I want you to have a dedicated plan, right points of contact, skilled people to be inside that plant, to be there when badness happens, and you're rehearsing it. And that taps into things, I think, like Don's going to talk about in a second, on like recovery and so forth. Like, how are we going to deal with this as a whole should be that plan. And that kicks us into those tabletops, that kicks us into those instant response reviews, things like that. So if you were to do those 5 things, you would absolutely have a world leading OT security program. Obviously, you have your people and your process around all those things, but those would be my top 5 controls. Don?
Okay, I'm not going to disagree with anything you said, but I did get my little Post-it note while you were talking so that I can just cover some other things to throw into the mix. So I think the basic to me is getting IT and OT to work together. That's the biggest issue that most CISOs that I talk to and our customers are confronting. Their IT and their OT, they're totally different cultures. They're totally different areas of expertise, although there's a lot of overlap, and they need to work together. So if you've ever heard me talk before, sorry about, I'm going to go down this path again, my kind of soapbox, but we started with the Nist Csf. We brought IT, security, sat on one side of the table, and on the other side of the table was Umair, some plant engineers, plant managers, and we all sat there for a week, and we used the Nist Csf to just go through and talk through all of the items in the Nist Csf. And so you get to things like you said, Rob, like inventory. What are all of our assets? And IT they have their asset inventory. OT had their asset inventory. OT's asset inventory was in spreadsheets, and each plant maintained their own spreadsheets. And were they up to date? Probably not. And in order to get those spreadsheets, they had to crawl under desks and look for computers and try to figure out who owned them. And so asset inventory was a big deal. IT explained how they did it, and OT said, well, if you could tag our assets so that you treat them differently, you don't just patch them automatically when you patch the desktops in the company, then we might let you manage our asset inventory for us. And so we went down that path, and now IT and OT assets are managed together, which is a really good thing because it makes vulnerability management easier, patch management easier. So just that working together was good. I met with a CISO who said they have an OT networking team, and they just work totally separately from the IT networking team. If you can have one networking team that does your IT and OT, it eliminates a lot of duplication of effort, and just having the consistency between the two where possible makes things much easier. So it eliminates some of the complexity in your overall enterprise environment. So getting IT and OT to work together, I think, is huge. Feeding your data from OT into your SIM so that your IT CSIRT can respond to alerts in OT. That doesn't mean that they're going to go in and start messing with computers in the plant, but they'll know to coordinate and to alert the OT plant personnel. So that's one thing, just that IT and OT working together, I think, is essential. Another thing, third-party risk. So our third-party risk program, originally, we just cared about companies that had access to our confidential or private information, or had access or had something on our network. But then in 2019, when ransomware started hitting OT, we had suppliers that were supplying parts that we use in our products that were getting hit with ransomware. And they would notify us, it'll be at least a month before we can start supplying you parts again. So all of a sudden, this company that we didn't care about from a security perspective, they just supply us boxes of things. Now, all of a sudden, we cared. And so third-party risk, I think it's really important to think about your critical suppliers in your plants, and those top critical suppliers of things, components for your products. It's important to make sure that they have a good security program. Recover, you talked about Recover, Rob. When we started down our path, we decided to start with Recover. This was, I don't know, Umair, we might have changed our priorities after NotPetya because we had our workshop in January, NotPetya was in June, but we did end up prioritizing recover because we realized, boy, if we had to recover, we have no idea where all of those documents are, where all of that information is. It's on computers under desks that have probably never been backed up. So I still say prioritize recover because of the environment that we're living in. And just last point is the SOC. So everybody, there's this debate. Do you integrate with your IT SOC or do you have an OT SOC? And what we're finding in our customers is they have a sophisticated IT security program, IT and OT are working together. They want to integrate. Great, that makes sense. But others have an MSSP for IT security, and they say there's no way I want those people touching my plants. So they need to have a separate OT SOC. Some of them have the capability to run their own OT SOC. Other ones are looking to outsource, which is not a plug, but that's why Rockwell decided to have a cybersecurity SOC for OT for our customers. So I think that's a really important issue that everyone needs to figure out, like, where do you fall in that spectrum? Sorry, that was a really long answer.
How dare you be thoughtful and insightful.
I think that's great, but I think what was interesting with both y'all's answers were that it's almost like you were expanding on each other, where Rob, you were specifically kind of focusing on the technology and a little bit of the process. And Don, your focus was more so on how you actually operationalize those technologies into programs, to manage OT cyber risk. Mm-hmm. And I think I'd love to hear about y'all's perspectives on this challenge with operationalization, because I think that's where kind of the rubber meets the road with some of these technologies. And also that's where, you get into these scenarios where if you do start to try to do everything at once, these things take time, right? There's culture change built into some of this operationalization. There's other challenges built into it. There's do we even have the people question that comes into play, where those people come from? I know, Don, we dealt with this too. So I'd love to hear.
Nobody has the people, that's for sure. The OT security experts, yeah. Everybody.
Yeah, so I'd love from both of you just to maybe expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll speak from Dragos' perspective, and I'll speak from kind of my perspective being over at SANS. So I also authored the ICS response course and the threat intelligence course over at SANS. Very passionate about teaching people and getting them on board. And my views changed over the years. When I got out of the military and went to teach the SANS, you couldn't have convinced me to even look at technology. I was like, it's people's the answer. People's always the answer. Can't be technology. It's got to be people. And all I wanted to do is train people up. And my students come back to me like, that's great and wonderful, and we're glad for the training, but like, we don't have the tools to be successful. Like, the technology isn't where we need it to be. And then there's also the realization that you just can't train people fast enough if you're not putting automation in there as well, which for professionals in the automation security industry, we should be pretty pro automation, I think. But when we look at this challenge, I think you're going to have to find the right partners. And likewise, this isn't meant to just be a Dragos plug, but like when we talk to our customers after deploying like a technology, 9 times out of 10, the conversation is not about why our technology is better than a competitor's. That we'll all argue that we're the best, but that's not the conversation. 9 times out of 10, it's that we have OT security folks. Like, our whole company is OT security professionals. And after the install, we're going in and helping them in customer success and how do we operationalize this and how do we help you on this journey? Because we know it's a journey. Like, if you're selling into IT security, to have one AV versus another versus EDR, whatever you're talking differentiation. But to actually go and do something you've never done before, it's a big journey, and you better have partners to go on that journey with you, because you can't reasonably resource everything in-house, even if not from the cost perspective, but just on the finding the talent. However, a non-Dragos perspective on also building the talent, like, don't try to compete in the market to go find the ICS cybersecurity principal consultant. You're not going to get it. Most of them work at Dragos. Like, there's also a bunch at Rockwell. But my point is, they're usually the type of people that want to go see lots of cases. So forget the money. They're so excited about this field and the opportunity, and it's all kind of wild, wild west and new. They want to go see multiple sites, multiple customers, get to respond. Like having a principal level incident responder sit inside a company that sees an incident once a year is not going to be exciting for them in their career development. So my personal preference for companies is to invest with your local universities and state colleges, to get relationships with your operations side of the house, where you may have a test environment that they're using for testing out operations issues. Maybe on the side, you can commission it for a couple hours a month, whatever, to bring in your junior security people and get hands-on with equipment and so forth. Even just putting on a hard hat and doing a site walk down is very educational for somebody on the security side of the organization to start learning about operations and to see the tangible nature of this mission. And it's not just ones and zeros. So I would strongly advocate on building the expertise. I think that's the only sustainable model. And I would strongly advocate on having the right partners. If you're going to build the expertise, please fix your HR systems first. I'm so tired of seeing brand new in the field people want to get a start, and then they see that you've got to have like a SAN cert. And I teach a SANs, don't get me wrong, but you got to have a SAN cert or a CSSP or something for an entry level position. That's stupid. That's not an entry level capable thing. It's gatekeeping. Or, hey, I want you to have 5 years experience in a 3-year-old technology. I mean, that's just sloppy. So you got to fix that and to be able to entice these people. But there's not an industrial company out here that doesn't have a cool mission. And you should be leveraging that mission as part of your pitch to get people to come and join you. But if you're just going to sit them in an IT cubicle and they're not going to go see the substation, manufacturing plant, whatever, you shouldn't be surprised when they leave you to go to a bank, because you're not treating them differently as if you were a bank. But if you can actually take them out in the field, they're gonna know that. They're gonna see that. They're gonna value that experience.
Boy, don't get me going down that path about entry-level positions with 3 to 5 years of experience. Don't worry, won't get on that path. But so I'm going to answer your question a little bit different way, Mayor. So at Rockwell, we looked at it as we had a foundational roadmap that we wanted to get out into our top, at least our tier 1 and tier 2 plants. Tier 3, they're still in progress, but we wanted to get that foundational program out there. And that involved the asset inventory, the segmentation, the threat detection, the integration with the SOC, the response, incident response, recovery. So we had that foundational program. And then before Umair left, he took the Nist Csf manufacturing profile and looked at, okay, how can we use this to take our program up to the next level? Because now we need to really look at every plant individually instead of all as a whole, and start looking at each one and do we have the people, the process, and the technologies in place? So now we feel like, okay, we have that foundation, which is mainly technology and some process. And now we really need to focus on the people and beefing up the processes. So that's what we're doing now. And you're absolutely right, Rob. We're looking at it like, this is an opportunity. We have so many OT experts at Rockwell. This is a real opportunity to expand our security staff by giving them an opportunity to say, hey, I understand our plans. I would really love to understand security and be that person, because we're not looking for somebody who has to be hands-on keyboard security, master's degree expert. We need somebody who can execute the processes that we put together and make sure that our plants are doing what they're supposed to be doing from a security perspective. So that's kind of the approach that we're taking. I still am concerned about the lack of those people and that expertise out there. And I'm actually on the industrial advisory board for the Georgia Tech School of Cybersecurity and Privacy. I can't believe if I got that whole thing right. But that's one thing I'm stressing with Georgia Tech. Like, I think from a higher ed perspective, we need to start thinking about OT security. We need to have some educational credentialing for people, that we're turning them out so that we can get some good entry-level talent that we can take and then train and get started quickly.
Go Jackets. I'm a Georgia Tech alum. So
That's right. I remember when I got that position, Umair, I told Umair I feel bad. I felt like he should have it, not me.
I'm open to consult. So feel free to bring me in whenever. So I think we're about 54 minutes in here. I think we're running pretty close on time. I think there was one question that I saw. I know Rob's been in here answering questions.
Yeah, I've been answering as many as I can while listening in.
So I have
Oh,
one.
you're a better multitasker than I am.
It's the ADD. It helps.
So I think I have one question that I think we can get to. Hopefully, it doesn't kind of push us over. But one question that it came in was, do you have any advice on how an OT security manager can help push change culture when the relationship between IT and OT is strained, and an IT style solution is the default approach that is being pushed?
Don, you want to?
So the IT approach is being pushed. You have an OT security person and they're just not working together. Is that the question?
Yeah. Seems like there's a strained relationship.
This sounds like the CSO who's got a GRC framework that they want to say, well, why are you not in compliance? What do you mean you have vulnerabilities longer than 30 days? How do you deal with that kind of scenario?
That's why I think, honestly, having that workshop, pulling both teams together for a week, sit at a table, COVID is sort of over, have the happy hour at the end of every day so that you kind of get to know each other and build a relationship. I swear it really worked for us. We lucked out, I think. We just said, hey, let's try this. And now here we are. That was January of 17. We are now in January of 22, 5 years later, and that program is still going. The relationships still work. IT and OT work together on a daily basis. It's just a beautiful thing. And so honestly, I strongly advocate that you get those two teams at the table. And it was contentious at first, right, Umair? It was literally IT on one side, OT on the other side. And you could see the atmosphere going from contentious to understanding to respect. And that's really what you need, is you need that respect, that mutual respect for each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think what we learned during that time was that we're all on the same mission, right? We're not here to disagree or try to fight for what we think is right. Nope, we're on the same mission together. And so it's in our best interest to understand each other on the other side better so we can help each other. Yep. To be successful. And we did, try to go in and do, I think, it wasn't an annual thing, but I remember in 2020 at Rockwell, we organized a kind of second go around, but then COVID hit. So we had to postpone that. But the idea was the same. And it was almost to make sure that it was an event, it was an occasion, and that it was just as much about the technical piece as it was about getting people together and building relationships.
Yeah, because we were 3 years in and we figured, hey, we may have some course correction. And we did course correction. We did change that roadmap. It's not like we had it perfect 5 years ago. But yeah, that was I have to say, those things virtually, well, that was the beginning of COVID too. Now you might be able to do it better virtually. We're better at this now, but we weren't in the beginning of 2020. Not at all.
Yeah.
Last comments, Rob?
Yeah, I would just say that, that's the answer. That's the right way to do it. The reality is sometimes it's not going to work. And so just my optimism would say 9 times out of 10, it's going to work. Go do that. But you might have to get creative. I had an entity where I went and briefed the board, talked to the CEO. It's a massive alignment with them. The board was ready to go. The OT side of the house was ready to go. Got out of the boardroom. The CEO was very explicit. The CSO, hey, I want you to invest in this. I want you to really take care of our plants and so forth and so on. Called up the CSO, never heard from the CSO. I called him up a month later. I was like, hey man, you don't need to use us, but I'm just curious, you need any help? What's going on? And his response was, oh yeah, we're not doing that. Like, excuse me? And he'd come from financial services, which is not a bad thing, but he came from financial services and he came into this industrial company, had no understanding what the mission was there. and said, well, we're not done with our enterprise IT project yet. Why would I even look at the plants? I was like, because that's where you generate revenue. It's what your CEO said. It's what your board said. And we all agreed to it. So you're just going to tell them all to screw off. And that's what he wanted to do. And unfortunately for his whole team, it was demoralizing. Half of his team left inside a 12-month period. And he ended up getting fired for ignoring the board and all the other stuff when they had their first major incident. It was revealed that they didn't do anything. So there will be bad scenarios out there, but I don't want to doom and gloom folks, but your boards right now are more versed on the risk of OT security than half of the other executives I meet in the industry. And you need to catch up on that. And to me, again, get alignment, pick some controls, pick the best place to be. There's a bunch of questions in here that we'll get to in the blog, but most of them relate to things like Nist framework or whatever else. The frameworks are not the point. 95% of the frameworks focus on prevention. So you'll never actually get to full security if you only do the frameworks anyways. Do your work that you know from the risk alignment, then map it to the frameworks. Then which one you choose, it doesn't really matter. I'm with Don, though. I'm a big fan of the Nist Cybersecurity framework, but don't make that the point. Make the risk reduction of the strategy as you're doing the point, then just map it to the framework to have a common lexicon. But anyways, I know we're out of time, but just want to say thank you. I'll pass it back over to you, but thanks everybody that dialed in. I know we had like a couple thousand people register for this, which was pretty phenomenal just to see the excitement in our OT community. Don, thank you so much for your time as well and being here with us. Umair.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining. We appreciate both Don and Rob for this wonderful, insightful conversation. And thank you for all the attendees. As Rob mentioned, we will get to the open questions. There's quite a few questions. Feel free to drop them in continually. And we will try to get those into the blog post. All right. Hope everyone has a wonderful day. See ya.
Thanks.